In the vast stretches of space, the Zarnath Empire had grown powerful and confident. Their fleets glided through the stars like shadows, their ships sleek and dangerous, patrolling territories that spanned entire star systems. For generations, the Zarnath had believed that nothing in the galaxy could challenge them. Their scientists had mapped countless planets, their commanders had trained fleets to perfection, and their people lived secure, believing their dominion was absolute. The Zarnath lived in a world of order. Every colony, every fleet, every officer had a place and a duty. Chaos was an unknown word. Their cities on distant planets gleamed under the light of twin suns, their streets busy with activity. Citizens moved with purpose, knowing that they were part of a civilization that had survived countless wars and outlasted every rival. In their minds, the universe was predictable, and any threat could be calculated and controlled. On one quiet day in the central system of the Zarnath Empire, life carried on in the usual rhythm. Ships left and arrived at the orbital docks. Cargo transports moved between stations, and patrols flew through space with disciplined precision. The fleet commanders held their strategy meetings in grand control rooms, holographic maps hovering above tables, showing planets, fleets, and potential targets. They spoke confidently, discussing rumors about far-off systems and strange signals. Most of these were quickly dismissed. After all, the Zarnath had never encountered anything truly threatening. Despite their confidence, some among the lower ranks whispered about strange tales coming from explorers at the edge of their territory. Stories spoke of beings called humans, creatures that lived on a distant, tiny blue planet in a remote corner of the galaxy. According to the rumors, humans had survived countless dangers, had technology unlike anything else, and carried a courage that defied logic. Most dismissed these stories as exaggerations, myths meant to entertain children or distract the public. Even the fleet's intelligence officers marked the reports as unverified and filed them away. The calm and order of the Zarnath Empire gave its citizens a sense of invincibility. Every patrol was confident, every soldier proud. In the control rooms, holograms of enemy fleets were studied meticulously, and defensive strategies were updated constantly. Yet in all these years, there had never been a true test. The Zarnath had grown strong in part because nothing had challenged them, and nothing had forced them to question their supremacy. They had built a life of certainty, and certainty had made them comfortable, maybe even careless. In the quiet corners of their capital planets, civilians went about daily life, unaware of the subtle shifts in the galaxy beyond their view. Children played in the streets of glowing cities. Teachers taught in schools with advanced technology that made learning almost effortless. And merchants sold exotic goods from distant systems. Everyone believed in the safety provided by the Zarnath fleets, that the soldiers and commanders patrolling the skies could handle any threat. Fear was rare, and excitement was limited to curiosity about faraway worlds, not concern for danger. Even among the highest-ranking officers, there was little worry. The leaders of the Zarnath Empire had dealt with rebellion, sabotage, and minor incursions from small alien civilizations. They had strategies to crush every challenge quickly. Every decision, every maneuver, and every fleet movement was designed with precision. The Empire had survived centuries because it relied on logic, discipline, and the assumption that no force in the galaxy could match its power. And for a long time, this assumption had been true. But legends, even if ignored, have a way of finding their way into reality. While most dismissed humans as myths, explorers and scouts occasionally returned with strange tales. A ship lost in a remote nebula might report seeing a massive, strangely built vessel, moving through space with a speed and precision that defied understanding. A lone probe might detect energy readings that didn't match any known technology. These reports were rare, scattered, and often laughed off. Stories for children, some officers would say. Fiction masquerading as fact, others would mutter. And yet curiosity lingered. The stories planted a tiny seed of unease, too small to take seriously but impossible to completely ignore. Life continued on as usual. The Zarnath Empire's fleets glided through the stars, defending their territory, training new soldiers and expanding their influence. In the grand control rooms, the leaders reviewed the galaxy with confidence, knowing that every threat could be neutralized. There was no rush, no alarm, and certainly no expectation that anything could disturb the calm. They believed themselves untouchable. But in the darkest corners of the Empire, in deep space observation posts far from the capital, A faint ripple appeared on the sensors. At first it seemed like a minor anomaly, a glitch in the system. But as the readings became clearer, it revealed something that did not fit any known pattern. A massive object was entering the outer edges of the Zarnath space, a presence so strange and so large that it did not match any known design. The sensors captured movement that was precise, almost deliberate, unlike any ship the Empire had catalogued. The initial reports went to the fleet commanders. Some ignored them. Others noted them, marking them as anomalies to monitor. But as more data came in, the presence became undeniable. It was moving toward the central system. It was massive. It was unlike anything the Zarnath had encountered before, and it was heading straight for them. For now, in the cities, the civilians remained blissfully unaware. Children laughed in the streets, merchants bartered for exotic goods, and soldiers trained with pride. The Empire, confident and orderly, had no reason to suspect that anything could shake its foundations. They had never faced humans, never imagined the possibility, and had lived in a bubble of control and certainty. The calm stretched across the system, a calm that seemed eternal. Little did the Zarnath know. This calm was the final moment before the storm. The galaxy had hidden a force that would challenge everything they believed about themselves. And that force, the humans, was on its way. The first warning came quietly, almost like a whisper, but it was enough to stir the Zarnath fleet into alert. The deep space sensors had detected something unusual, a massive object moving through the outer reaches of the system. At first, the fleet commanders assumed it was a new type of cargo ship, or perhaps a remnant of an old exploration mission. But as the readings became clearer, the truth could no longer be denied. The object was enormous, bigger than anything in the Zarnath fleet. Its shape was strange, unfamiliar yet purposeful, almost like it had been designed with intelligence far beyond anything the Zarnath had ever encountered. It moved silently, as if gliding through the vacuum with confidence. There was no hesitation, no irregular movement, no sign of error. The fleet officers exchanged nervous glances as the data continued to stream in. "It's unlike anything we know," one officer whispered to another. "Its size, and the speed. It shouldn't even be possible." The commanding officers tried to remain calm, but even they felt a flicker of unease. Orders were sent to track the object more closely, to prepare defense grids, and to alert all nearby patrols. Holographic maps in the fleet's control room flickered with readings and projections, but the object refused to fit any known parameters. The more they scanned, the less they understood. It was like watching a shadow move through a world that had been thought completely mapped. For the citizens of the Zarnath Empire, life continued almost normally. In the orbital cities, people went about their routines unaware of the approaching presence. Schools functioned, markets were busy, and entertainment centers filled with laughter and music. Yet behind the grand walls of the control rooms, a quiet tension was growing. The fleet commanders were no longer confident. They had faced invaders, raiders, and rebels before. But this was different. There was no past encounter to guide their response. They had never imagined an enemy like this. By the time the object entered the central system, the Zarnath fleet could no longer ignore it. Fleets scrambled from their stations, ships powering up faster than normal, their energy shields humming in preparation. The commanders gathered around holographic displays, projecting the object's trajectory and possible intentions. Every prediction ended with uncertainty. It did not move like an invader, but it did not appear neutral either. Its purpose was unclear, and that uncertainty was perhaps the most terrifying part. The fleet officers debated their options. Some suggested a defensive approach, forming formations to contain the object. Others argued for an immediate strike, assuming that hesitation could cost them dearly. Voices raised, tempers flared, but no one could agree. The object moved steadily, methodically, unperturbed by the fleet's attempts to intercept or analyze it. Every scan seemed to reveal more unknowns. Energy signatures that did not match any known technology, hull patterns that made no sense, and an aura of dominance that pressed against the psyche of anyone monitoring it. As the object drew closer, the human presence became undeniable. Even without direct contact, the Zarnath fleet could sense the power it radiated. Communication officers reported unusual signals, almost like a language, but far more advanced than anything in the Zarnath archives. Commanders tried to decipher it, but the patterns made no sense. And yet there was a feeling in the room, a silent warning that was impossible to ignore. Panic began to ripple through the lower ranks. Soldiers who had been trained for years, who had faced countless threats, now felt fear creeping into their minds. Some hesitated at their posts, unsure if they should follow orders. Others spoke quietly among themselves, whispering about the legends of humans, tales they had once laughed at. The same stories that had been dismissed as myths now returned with a weight of terrifying reality. In the fleet's observation decks, the object loomed larger with each passing hour. Crew members pressed against the transparent walls, staring in disbelief. It was more than a ship. It was a symbol of something far greater. Its size alone dwarfed entire squadrons, yet there was a grace to its movement, an intelligence in its navigation that suggested control beyond mechanical precision. Even the most experienced pilots felt a strange unease. Meanwhile, fleet leaders issued cautious communications, trying to maintain composure. "Identify," one commander said firmly. "Determine its intent." But their scanners could only capture fragments. The object's energy signature was unlike anything they had catalogued. Its hull appeared resistant to conventional weapons, and it emitted signals that interfered with communication systems. Every attempt to probe it resulted in confusion or failure. As hours passed, the object entered orbit around one of the outer planets in the system. Its presence was undeniable now. The Zarnath fleet formed defensive rings around the planet, trying to maintain control. But even in formation, there was tension, an understanding that the humans were not just a threat to ships or soldiers, but to the very confidence of the Empire itself. Commanders whispered privately, realizing that this presence could shatter the centuries of order and control they had relied upon. On the ground, civilians remained largely unaware. Orbital cities continued their routines. Children played in floating parks, and merchants conducted trades with automated systems. But some of the observation satellites captured images that could not be explained. Strange reflections, vast surfaces of metal unlike any design in the Zarnath archives, and a size that seemed almost mythical. Those who saw it reported their findings, but few could fully understand the implications. In the fleet's control rooms, tension grew. The fleet commanders convened in emergency sessions, projecting every possible scenario. Could it be an advanced alien race? Was it a new weapon of war? Could it be an unknown human fleet, as the old myth suggested? Each scenario carried its own dread, but no scenario offered certainty. This was the first time the Zarnath faced something entirely unpredictable. Despite the growing fear, the object did not attack. Instead, it hovered with a silent patience that unnerved the fleet. Every scanner, every probe, and every attempt to communicate returned inconclusive results. The humans did not strike, yet their presence was an attack on the mind, a challenge to the very concept of Zarnath superiority. The commanders began to realize that conventional tactics might not apply. Here was a power that could not be fought like any ordinary enemy. It demanded respect, caution, and perhaps fear. Word of the object's arrival spread throughout the system. Fleet posts sent continuous reports, each more detailed than the last, describing the scale, precision, and inexplicable energy readings. Panic began to take hold among the lower ranks as soldiers whispered about what they were witnessing. Stories of humans once considered fairy tales became urgent warnings. Even civilians in outlying cities began to feel unease, noticing unusual lights in orbit, strange sensor readings, and communications interruptions. For the Zarnath, this was unprecedented. Every invasion, every rebellion, and every minor threat had been met with confidence and calculation. The Empire had never known fear on this scale. The object had arrived without aggression, yet it had achieved what no enemy ever could. It had unsettled the Zarnath mind, made them question their place in the galaxy, and forced them to reconsider what they knew about strength, power, and control. In one command room, a senior officer finally spoke aloud what others had been thinking quietly. "We may have underestimated them," he said, his voice low. This is unlike anything we have ever faced. We do not understand them, and I fear we may not be able to predict what comes next." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. For the first time in their history, the Zarnath Empire faced a presence that could not be immediately controlled, calculated, or dismissed. And though the humans had not fired a shot, Their arrival had already begun to change the balance of power, shaking the foundation of an empire built on certainty and dominance. As the fleet prepared for the unknown, the object remained still in orbit, a silent warning and a promise of what was yet to come. Every scanner, every probe, every patrol felt the weight of its presence. And as the hours passed, the Zarnath realized a terrifying truth. The calm of their universe, the order and predictability they had relied upon, was over. Humanity had arrived and nothing would ever be the same. The human warship had finally entered the central orbit of the Zarnath system, and for the first time, its full presence could be observed. Even through the most advanced Zarnath scanners, the sheer size and design of the vessel left the officers in stunned silence. It was unlike anything in the galaxy. Its hull was massive, smooth yet angular, and seemed to almost glow with an energy that defied measurement. There were no visible weapons like the Zarnath were accustomed to seeing, no gun turrets, no conventional artillery, and yet its aura radiated undeniable power. The fleet commanders struggled to interpret what they were seeing. It's enormous, one officer muttered almost to himself. And it's moving with purpose. Every movement is precise, calculated. The human ship did not attack. It did not fire lasers or missiles, nor did it engage in aggressive maneuvers. Instead, it drifted through space with a quiet confidence that unsettled the Zarnath fleet. Its presence alone seemed to dominate the area, like a shadow stretching over the stars. Every sensor and probe that the Zarnath launched to study the vessel returned confusing and contradictory readings. It emitted energy, yes, but not the kind of energy that could be used as a weapon in any familiar sense. It was almost like the ship itself was alive, a single entity with a purpose beyond comprehension. In the control rooms, officers exchanged anxious glances. Some tried to rationalize the situation, suggesting that it was merely an exploratory ship, or perhaps a scout from a distant civilization. Others, however, could not ignore the growing fear that was creeping into their minds. The human ship was not just a threat to their fleets, it was a threat to the very order they had always believed in. Even among the seasoned commanders there was uncertainty. Every strategy, every formation, every defensive measure they had learned over decades seemed useless against this vessel. Attempts to communicate met with silence except for signals that were unfamiliar, sophisticated, and untranslatable. It was as if the humans were speaking in a language designed to convey more than words, something that reached the mind rather than the ears. Panic began to ripple through the fleet. Pilots who had been trained to face the deadliest of enemies suddenly felt their confidence falter. Lower-ranking soldiers whispered about the legends they had once dismissed. Humans aren't just myths, one muttered. They're real. And they're here. The air in the fleet command centers was thick with tension, a quiet, gnawing fear that refused to be dismissed. Outside the control rooms, civilian populations in the outer planets remained largely unaware. Orbital cities continued their routines, schools functioned, and markets buzzed with activity. But satellites and observation posts detected strange phenomena, lights reflecting off the human ship, energy readings that confused the most advanced instruments, and sudden interference with communications. Rumors began to spread quietly among scientists and engineers, small murmurs of disbelief that grew steadily into worry. The human ship moved slowly through the system, scanning planets, observing fleets, and projecting an almost imperceptible presence that seemed to touch every part of the Zarnath Empire. It did not need to fire a single weapon to assert dominance. Its mere presence created a sense of vulnerability among the Zarnath fleets and commanders. For the first time in their history, the Empire was confronted with an unknown power that could not be categorized, predicted, or controlled. Fleet officers debated their next move. Some urged caution, suggesting that the human vessel be monitored from a distance, allowing it to reveal its intentions. Others insisted on a display of strength, forming defensive grids and preparing their fleets for immediate attack. Yet no plan felt sufficient. Every prediction of human behavior seemed inadequate. The ship defied logic, moving with an intelligence that no Zarnath officer had ever encountered. Despite the uncertainty, the fleet took action. Ships formed formations around strategic points, deploying small fighter units to probe the human ship. Every movement was calculated, precise, meant to send a clear message. The Zarnath were still in control. But the humans did not respond in kind. They did not react to aggression, nor did they retreat. Their maneuvers were subtle, almost like a chess player observing an opponent waiting for the right moment to make a decisive move. The presence of the human ship began to have a psychological impact. Commanders admitted privately that fear had crept into their decisions. Pilots hesitated before following orders. Soldiers questioned their training, wondering if it was truly sufficient. The legends of humans, once dismissed as fairy tales, now seemed real and terrifying. For generations, the Zarnath had prided themselves on logic, precision, and control. Now those pillars were shaking. Observation drones sent to study the ship returned images that only heightened the unease. The humans had technology unlike anything in the Zarnath database. Hull materials that seemed impervious to conventional scans, energy systems that could not be traced or measured accurately, and a design that combined elegance with raw power. Every image, every reading seemed to suggest a civilization far beyond the Zarnath in certain ways. The human warship's movements were deliberate but non-aggressive, yet they communicated a clear message. The humans were aware of the Zarnath presence, and they were capable of overwhelming it if necessary. The calm and confidence that had long defined the Zarnath Empire was beginning to fracture. The fleet commanders, once certain of their supremacy, now faced an enemy that operated outside every known rule. In the lower ranks, fear spread like wildfire. Pilots who had once boasted of their skills now doubted themselves. Engineers trained to manage the most complex systems found their instruments failing to give accurate readings. Even civilians in distant colonies began to notice strange anomalies in communications and orbital observations, prompting quiet concern. For the first time, the Zarnath could not claim control over their environment. The human ship seemed to understand the psychological effect it had on the Zarnath. Without firing a shot, it demonstrated power that no fleet formation could match. Its presence alone created uncertainty, doubt, and fear. Commanders attempted to coordinate attacks or distractions, but every effort was met with subtle precision, avoiding direct confrontation while maintaining dominance. Hours passed with the human ship moving slowly through the central system. Every scan, every probe, every attempt to communicate was met with silence, confusion, or interference. The Zarnath fleet could only watch, realizing that this was not an ordinary encounter. This was a demonstration of power, strategy, and presence that transcended conventional warfare. The humans were teaching them a lesson without violence. Sometimes sheer presence is more terrifying than any weapon. Fleet officers began to record their observations carefully. Every detail of the human ship, every movement, every energy reading was documented. But as detailed as the reports were, none could capture the feeling that spread among the fleet: awe, fear, and uncertainty. The Zarnath Empire, confident for generations, faced a force that challenged the very foundation of their knowledge and pride. By the end of the day, the human ship had moved through several key points in the system, scanning, observing, and projecting its power. It did not attack, it did not retreat, but it had achieved something remarkable. It had unsettled the most powerful fleet the Zarnath had ever commanded. Commanders and pilots alike were forced to admit that they were unprepared for this encounter, and that their confidence had been shattered. As night fell over the outer orbital cities, the citizens remained largely unaware of the silent drama unfolding in space. Yet for those in command rooms and on the bridge of the fleet, there was no rest. Every sensor reading, every update was a reminder of the unknown power hovering above them. The human ship had not fired a single weapon, but it had demonstrated a control and confidence that left the Zarnath unsettled. The fleet commanders convened for emergency meetings, reviewing strategies, discussing scenarios, and trying to anticipate human intentions. Every possible response seemed inadequate. No tactics, no weapons, no formations could guarantee success against a force that operated outside all known logic. The human ship had arrived not as a conqueror, but as a presence that forced the Zarnath to confront their own limitations. By the end of Part 3, the Zarnath realized a terrifying truth. They were no longer the most dominant force in the system. Something had arrived that challenged every assumption they had about the galaxy, about power, and about themselves. The human ship had moved slowly, deliberately, and with quiet confidence, demonstrating a kind of dominance that did not require violence, but demanded recognition. The calm they had always relied upon was gone. The certainty they had taken for granted was shattered. The humans were here, and the Zarnath had no idea what would come next. By the time the human warship had settled into the central orbit of the Zarnath system, panic was spreading like wildfire. What began as quiet unease in the fleet command centers had now grown into a storm of fear, confusion, and tension. Fleet officers who had once commanded confidence and order now found themselves second-guessing every decision. Pilots and soldiers who had trained their entire lives for war were trembling in their stations, unsure how to face an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Reports flooded in from the outer planets and orbital stations. Satellites detected unusual energy readings. Sensor arrays picked up unexplainable signals, and deep space monitoring stations recorded the human ship moving with flawless precision. Every attempt to track it, every probe or drone sent, failed to provide clarity. And the humans did not respond. They simply moved silently, deliberately, with an authority that demanded attention. The initial shock had left the Zarnath fleet frozen. They had never experienced anything like this before. Every plan they had relied upon for decades, every formation, every attack pattern, every defensive maneuver, suddenly felt inadequate. Officers gathered around holographic displays, frantically recalculating strategies, trying to predict movements. Every model ended with uncertainty. The humans were not predictable. They did not behave like conventional enemies. They operated with a confidence and intelligence that made the Zarnath feel small, inexperienced, and vulnerable. Panic spread from the command centers to the fleets themselves. Pilots hesitated before following orders. Ships that had once flown in perfect formation now drifted slightly out of place, a symptom of the fear gripping their crews. Engineers who monitored the vessel's systems reported malfunctions, though every system had been tested and maintained perfectly. Stress, fear, and uncertainty were affecting performance, creating problems that had nothing to do with technical failure. Fleet leaders attempted to reassure their soldiers. "Stay calm," one commander ordered, his voice firm though tinged with worry. "We are the Zarnath. We have faced worse and overcome it. Follow your orders." But even as the words were spoken, the reality was undeniable. They were facing something beyond comprehension. The human ship had not fired a single weapon, yet its presence alone was a threat more terrifying than any armada the Zarnath had ever encountered. Civilian populations on distant planets began to feel the effects of this tension. While many were unaware of the exact nature of the threat, satellites and observation posts detected unusual activity. Lights in the sky were misinterpreted, communication systems flickered, and some colonies reported unexplained energy surges. Rumors began to circulate. Stories of a massive human ship that could crush entire fleets without firing a shot, of beings who were both clever and terrifying. Parents whispered to children about the legends they had once dismissed. Scientists, engineers, and scholars debated feverishly over what they were seeing, struggling to reconcile myth with reality. Within the fleet, fear turned to desperation. Orders were given to launch probing attacks, to test the human vessel's defenses. Squadrons of fighters streaked toward the ship, weapons charged, energy shields activated. But every move was anticipated. Drones sent to analyze the ship were intercepted effortlessly, not destroyed violently, but neutralized in ways that left the Zarnath struggling to understand. It was a show of power that was both subtle and overwhelming. The humans did not need to destroy anything to demonstrate dominance. They merely had to act. And the Zarnath felt the effect immediately. Fleet commanders tried to maintain control, but their confidence was slipping. Debates turned into arguments, and arguments turned into panic. Some officers suggested retreat. Others insisted on more aggressive probing, but every suggestion was tinged with fear. The human ship operated in a way that rendered conventional tactics useless. It was not simply a matter of strength or numbers. The humans had a presence, a mastery of perception, and an intelligence that could not be measured by sensors or holograms. The psychological impact on the Zarnath soldiers was profound. Many had trained for decades believing that their skill, discipline, and technology were unmatched. Now they questioned themselves. "Are we really prepared?" whispered a young pilot to his partner, as they watched the human ship glide effortlessly across the stars. Engineers tasked with monitoring weapon systems noticed strange interference in their instruments, as if the human ship disrupted more than just sensors. Even the most experienced veterans admitted privately that they had never felt fear like this. Panic did not remain confined to the fleet. Civilian leaders and planetary governors received continuous updates from the front lines. Their advisors, experts in strategy and technology, could offer no clear explanation. Rumors and fear began to influence decision-making. Some governors considered evacuating colonies while others demanded immediate retaliation. Messages flew back and forth, each carrying a sense of urgency and growing dread. For the first time in history, the Zarnath Empire faced a situation it could not control, predict, or fully understand. The human ship moved with calm precision. It scanned the system, observed the fleets, and projected an authority that felt almost alive. Its movements were deliberate but not aggressive, and yet every maneuver communicated power. The Zarnath fleet attempted to respond, but their actions were disjointed, hesitant, and ineffective. Pilots hesitated, squadrons misaligned, and defensive grids operated below peak efficiency. The humans had achieved something remarkable. They had turned the mightiest empire in the system into a state of doubt and fear, without firing a single shot. Back on the control decks, officers began to whisper about the legends they had once scoffed at. Humans were said to be clever, adaptable, and brave, but the reality exceeded imagination. Here was a presence that could not be understood, resisted conventional analysis, and operated with a precision that defied expectation. Even the oldest commanders, veterans of countless campaigns, admitted that they had underestimated what humans were capable of. The panic was not just about the humans' physical power, it was about control. The Zarnath had always believed that they could control any situation, predict any outcome, and dominate any opponent. The human ship had shattered that belief. Now every decision, every order, and every action was questioned. Fear became contagious. One commander's hesitation led to another's, and soon entire squadrons were second-guessing themselves. The humans were winning without fighting, simply by existing in a way that the Zarnath could not comprehend. Civilians who monitored the situation via broadcasts or news channels noticed strange anomalies. Communication channels flickered, sensor images showed something massive moving in orbit, and a sense of unease spread quietly through the colonies. Children asked questions their parents could not answer. Scholars debated whether this could really be a human vessel, or if it was something else entirely. Stories that had once been considered myths were now subjects of serious discussion. In the fleet's observation decks, the human ship's presence was like a shadow. Crew members watched in silence, unable to tear their eyes away. Its sheer size dwarfed entire squadrons, yet there was a grace to its movements that was almost mesmerizing. Energy fields shimmered along its hull in ways that made no conventional sense. Every detail communicated mastery, control, and awareness. The Zarnath soldiers began to feel the psychological weight of facing something they could neither understand nor predict. By the end of the day, the panic had spread throughout the fleet and into the heart of the Zarnath Empire. The human ship had not fired a single weapon, yet it had achieved something that centuries of conquest could not. It had instilled fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Commanders admitted privately that they could not guarantee victory. Pilots questioned their training. Soldiers questioned their orders. And the Empire itself faced the frightening realization that it was no longer untouchable. The calm and order that had defined the Zarnath way of life was gone. The humans were here, and they were not just a threat to ships or planets. They were a threat to the very confidence and pride that had defined an entire civilization. Panic, once a foreign concept, had become the defining feeling across fleets, stations, and even distant colonies. For the Zarnath, there was no precedent, no strategy, no experience that could prepare them for what was unfolding. As the hours turned into night across the system, the human warship continued to hover, observe, and project power. It did not need to act aggressively. Its very presence was enough to command attention, to inspire awe, and to terrify even the most confident officers. The Zarnath were learning a lesson they had never imagined, that sometimes fear could be more effective than any weapon, and presence more powerful than any fleet. By the end of Part 4, the Empire was changed. The humans had arrived not to fight immediately, but to demonstrate an intelligence, confidence, and presence that shook the Zarnath to their core. Panic had spread through the fleets and into civilian populations. The legends were real. The humans were here, and the Zarnath Empire was no longer sure of anything. The first cracks in their sense of invincibility had appeared, and nothing in the galaxy could prepare them for what was coming next. The Zarnath Empire had never known a situation like this. Panic had spread through fleets and colonies, and yet the human warship had not fired a single shot. Its presence alone had broken the confidence of the most powerful civilization in the system. But the humans were not content with silent observation. Slowly, deliberately, they began to demonstrate their strength, and the Zarnath could only watch in disbelief. It began with subtle displays. Small drones emerged from the human warship, moving with precision unlike anything the Zarnath had seen. They scanned fleets, circled planets, and hovered near stations, yet they caused no damage. Instead, they sent a clear message. Humans were aware of everything, they could reach anywhere, and they could act with control the Zarnath could not counter. Pilots who observed the drones reported a strange feeling, a weight, a sense of being watched and evaluated. Even the most seasoned officers admitted that their confidence wavered under the gaze of something so meticulous. The human ship's energy fields became visible, shimmering in space like a living aura. Weapon systems charged and retracted with silent authority, not firing at anything, yet clearly demonstrating power. The Zarnath fleet attempted to probe these systems, sending small fighter squadrons toward the ship. But the human warship responded without aggression. It moved with smooth precision, deploying defensive shields in a way that neutralized attacks without destruction. Each failed attempt left the Zarnath more shaken than the last. Fleet commanders realized the truth. This was not a conventional enemy. The humans did not rely on brute force or overwhelming numbers. They relied on strategy, intelligence, and the power of presence. Every move was calculated to dominate without destruction. The Zarnath could see it, feel it, and fear it. Even their most advanced weapons seemed almost irrelevant in comparison. Some officers began to panic openly. "We cannot match this," one shouted in frustration. "Our weapons, our ships, they cannot even touch it." Others tried to calm their crews, reminding them of training, tactics, and the history of Zarnath victories. But the humans had already shattered the foundation of their confidence. Training and experience could not prepare them for a force that acted with such certainty and subtlety. Meanwhile, the human ship continued to display its technological superiority. Its smaller units, drones and automated fighters, moved with perfect synchronization, coordinating in ways the Zarnath could not predict. When the fleet attempted to block or intercept them, they found themselves outmaneuvered without violence. The humans did not need to attack. They simply proved that the Zarnath efforts were ineffective. Every failed maneuver increased fear and doubt among the fleet, and the humans observed without haste, without malice, yet with undeniable authority. On distant planets, civilians began to notice anomalies as well. Communications flickered, energy readings fluctuated, and satellites detected strange lights moving in orbit. The more curious individuals tried to study the events, the more mysterious the human presence became. Some spoke quietly in cafes or homes, repeating stories they had once thought were myths. "This is what the legends warned us about," one said. "Humans are real, and they are not to be underestimated." Back in the fleet, commanders tried new strategies. Squadrons moved in coordinated formations, using combined energy shields and synchronized weapon systems. They attacked in waves, attempting to test the limits of the human defenses. But the humans responded with a calm precision that left them powerless. Not one vessel was destroyed, yet every attack was rendered ineffective. The Zarnath had expected resistance, but not control without confrontation. Each failed attempt was a reminder of the vast gap between the two civilizations. Fear became contagious. Pilots hesitated to fire weapons, unsure whether their efforts would succeed or fail. Engineers noticed interference in their systems that seemed to come from nowhere. Soldiers whispered about the humans' intelligence, about their ability to anticipate every move. The Zarnath had always prided themselves on skill and strategy. Yet they were discovering that intelligence alone could be outmatched by a combination of precision, observation, and psychological power. The human warship continued its methodical movements through the system. It visited each planet, scanning, observing, and projecting a presence that reminded the Zarnath of their limitations. At every orbital station, commanders noted the efficiency and sophistication of the humans' technology. Energy shields that deflected attacks without damage, communication systems that intercepted messages without revealing themselves, and drones that acted with intelligence far beyond anything the Zarnath had seen. Each demonstration reinforced the human superiority without firing a single weapon. The psychological impact was profound. Fleet officers began doubting their own knowledge, their tactics, and their ability to lead. Pilots questioned their training. Soldiers feared for their lives despite the lack of direct attack. The humans had accomplished what centuries of warfare could not. They had made the Zarnath feel vulnerable in ways they had never imagined. The fear was not only of physical harm but of being outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and rendered powerless. Even the civilian population began to feel the effect. News of the human presence spread slowly at first, then rapidly as more observations and reports came in. Rumors grew into stories. Stories grew into panic, and panic became a quiet chaos that reached the highest levels of government. Parents worried about children, merchants feared disruptions, and scientists struggled to make sense of the impossible technology they were witnessing. The humans were rewriting the understanding of power and control in the galaxy. In the fleet, desperation grew. Some commanders argued for retreat, others for more aggressive action, but every option seemed inadequate. The humans were not only technologically superior, they were psychologically dominant. Every movement, every display of power, every demonstration of control reminded the Zarnath of their limitations. The humans had achieved victory without a single battle, without a single shot fired. The Zarnath were learning that sometimes presence, intelligence, and strategy could overpower sheer numbers and firepower. The human ship did not act with cruelty or aggression. It was not ruthless. It did not destroy fleets or colonies. Instead, it acted with calm authority, showing that power was more than weapons. It was understanding, planning, and the ability to control a situation with confidence. The Zarnath realized that they had underestimated humans for centuries. They had laughed at stories, dismissed warnings, and assumed their supremacy was absolute. Now they knew they had been wrong. By the end of the day, the human warship had moved across the central system, visiting key planets and observing every fleet, station, and orbital city. Its presence had demonstrated superiority in every way possible without a single violent act. The Zarnath were left in disbelief, fear, and awe. They had always believed themselves untouchable, but the humans had shattered that illusion. Fleet officers held emergency meetings, trying to reorganize, strategize, and find any advantage they could. Every discussion returned to the same conclusion. The humans were beyond prediction, beyond conventional understanding, and their technology and strategy were unmatched. Even the most confident officers admitted privately that they had never faced an opponent like this. The civilians and colonies began to prepare for possible consequences, though no direct attack had occurred. People stockpiled resources, reviewed emergency procedures, and tried to understand what they were witnessing. Rumors and speculation ran rampant, but no one could fully comprehend the humans' capability or intent. The legends were true, but the reality was far more terrifying than any story had ever described. By the time night fell across the Zarnath system, the humans had accomplished what generations of warships could not. They had instilled a deep, pervasive fear. The fleet was demoralized, civilians were uneasy, and the government was forced to acknowledge that they were no longer in full control. The humans had achieved dominance not through violence, but through intelligence, presence, and precise, calculated action. For the Zarnath, the lesson was clear. Power was not only in numbers or weapons, but in understanding, strategy, and the ability to project confidence and control. The humans had shown that a single warship, moving with purpose and intelligence, could unsettle an entire civilization. The panic, fear, and awe they inspired would be remembered for generations. By the end of Part 5, the Zarnath Empire faced an undeniable truth. The humans were not myths, they were not legends, they were real and they were extraordinary. The human warship had shown technological superiority, strategic mastery, and psychological dominance. Without firing a single shot, the humans had proven that even the mightiest empire in the system could be humbled. The calm confidence of the Zarnath was gone. The certainty of their supremacy shattered. The humans had arrived, and the empire was forced to face the terrifying reality. They had underestimated an intelligence, a strategy, and a presence far beyond their comprehension. The stage was set for what would come next, and the Zarnath could only watch and prepare, knowing that their assumptions about the galaxy and themselves had been forever changed. The human warship had completed its demonstration. For hours, it had moved through the Zarnath system, scanning planets, observing fleets, and subtly asserting its dominance, yet it did not fire a single shot. It did not destroy a single vessel. Its power was shown not through destruction but through presence, intelligence, and control. The Zarnath Empire, once confident and untouchable, was left in awe, fear, and disbelief. Fleet commanders gathered in emergency meetings, trying to process what had just occurred. Holographic displays showed the human warship's movements, every maneuver calculated and precise. Yet, despite all the data, no one could explain exactly how the humans had achieved such mastery. Their technology, their strategy, and their calm authority were beyond comprehension. Even the most seasoned officers admitted privately that they had never faced an enemy like this before. "We cannot fight them like any other enemy," one commander said quietly. "We do not understand their technology. We do not understand their intentions, and we cannot predict their next move." His words were met with silence, a heavy realization settling over the room. The human ship had proven that strength was not always in weapons or numbers. It was in intelligence, precision, and the ability to inspire fear without violence. Across the outer planets, the civilian population began to understand the enormity of what had occurred. Satellites and observation stations recorded every movement of the human vessel. People spoke in hushed tones about what they had seen. Rumors spread, stories grew, and the legends of humans became reality. Children who had heard tales of incredible bravery and cunning now understood that these stories were not myths. They were true, and they were far more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. The Zarnath fleet was demoralized. Pilots who had flown countless missions now questioned their training and abilities. Engineers and scientists struggled to analyze the human technology, yet every attempt ended in frustration. Ships that had once represented unmatched power now seemed fragile and inadequate. Even the leaders of the Empire were forced to acknowledge a painful truth. The humans had shattered the illusion of Zarnath invincibility. In the control rooms, officers debated what to do next. Some urged immediate action, suggesting that the fleet regroup and launch a counterattack. Others argued for caution, believing that the humans were testing them, observing their reactions, and that any rash move could lead to disaster. Every suggestion was weighed with fear and uncertainty. For the first time, the Empire faced an enemy that could not be anticipated or measured. Every rule they had relied upon for generations seemed useless. The human warship, however, did not act aggressively. It remained calm, moving through the system with quiet authority. Its drones continued to patrol, its sensors scanned, and its energy field shimmered, demonstrating capabilities the Zarnath could not counter. Every display was precise, calculated, and deliberate. The humans were not here to destroy for the sake of destruction. They were here to show power, intelligence, and control. This demonstration had an effect far beyond the fleet. Across the colonies, people began to understand that the humans were unlike any civilization the Zarnath had encountered. Stories of bravery, intelligence, and resilience became subjects of serious discussion. Scholars debated the humans' capabilities, scientists tried to reverse engineer their technology, and ordinary citizens spoke in awe about what they had witnessed. Fear, respect, and curiosity spread in equal measure. For the Zarnath military, the psychological impact was profound. Soldiers and officers realized that they had been overconfident for generations. They had relied on numbers, weapons, and experience. But they now understood that intelligence and strategy could surpass all of these. The human warship had proven that a single vessel, with calculated movements and precise displays of technology, could dominate an entire system without firing a single weapon. The lesson was clear and humbling. Strength was not just in power, it was in knowledge, observation, and execution. Meanwhile, the human ship prepared to leave. It had shown its presence, demonstrated its power, and achieved its purpose without unnecessary aggression. Fleet commanders watched as the massive vessel moved toward the outer edge of the system, its movements still deliberate, calm, and precise. Pilots and soldiers followed it with tense eyes, aware that even a single misstep could invite disaster, yet also awed by the restraint and intelligence the humans had displayed. As the humans departed, the Zarnath began to process what had occurred. The Empire was left forever changed. Generals and fleet commanders would remember this day for the rest of their lives. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a civilization that combined intelligence, precision, and presence in ways the Zarnath had never imagined. The lesson was clear. They were no longer the undisputed masters of their system. Humans had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. Across the colonies, the story spread quickly. People shared observations, images, and reports of the human warship. Citizens who had once doubted the existence of humans now faced the undeniable truth. They were real, and they were extraordinary. Markets buzzed with speculation. Schools discussed the events and lessons, and families spoke in hushed tones about what they had seen. Even those far from the central system felt the weight of the humans' presence. Fleet officers continued their analysis long after the human ship had left. Every maneuver, every display, every drone deployment was scrutinized. Reports were written, strategies reconsidered, and training programs updated. The Empire had learned a harsh lesson. Humans were not just capable, they were masters of presence and control. Their technology, intelligence, and ability to influence without violence made them a force that could not be ignored or underestimated. In the weeks that followed, the Zarnath Empire struggled to regain confidence. Soldiers trained harder, scientists studied old data, and officers attempted to rebuild morale. Yet the memory of the human warship lingered. Its presence, calm authority, and unmatched precision haunted the fleets and stations. The Empire realized that humans had changed the rules of power. No longer could confidence be based solely on numbers or weapons. Intelligence, strategy, and presence had become equally important. The human ship's departure left the Zarnath with a profound respect and fear. Generations of arrogance built on centuries of dominance had been humbled in a single day. Fleet officers, soldiers, and civilians alike understood that the legends were real. Humans were not only capable, they were extraordinary. And they had shown the galaxy that power could exist beyond the conventional measures of war. In the central system, commanders gathered to discuss the future. They knew the humans could return at any time, and when they did, the Zarnath would need to be prepared. Yet despite the fear and awe, there was a new understanding. The humans had taught them a lesson that no battle ever could. Sometimes, intelligence and presence were stronger than weapons, and respect could be earned without aggression. The Empire also realized that this encounter was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, whispers of the human warship spread to other civilizations. The story of a single human ship capable of intimidating an entire empire without violence became legend almost instantly. Allies and rivals alike would hear of it, and humans would be recognized not just as survivors, but as masters of strategy, intelligence, and calculated dominance. For the Zarnath, the aftermath was a time of reflection. Fleet exercises became more sophisticated, training programs emphasized intelligence and observation, and officers were reminded that power alone was never enough. The memory of the human warship remained as a symbol of what could happen when strength, intelligence, and strategy combined. Every fleet deployment, every planetary defense plan, and every mission was now influenced by the lesson they had learned. Humans were a force that could not be underestimated. In the end, the human warship had achieved its purpose. It had demonstrated power without destruction, influenced the minds of the Zarnath, and reshaped the understanding of the galaxy. Fear, respect, and awe spread throughout the Empire, and the story of this encounter would be told for generations. The humans had arrived quietly, observed carefully, and left an impact far greater than any battle could have accomplished. And as the Zarnath Empire worked to rebuild confidence and strategy, they knew one thing for certain: the galaxy had changed. Humans were no longer legends. They were real, extraordinary, and capable of reshaping entire civilizations without firing a single shot. The Zarnath would never forget the day the humans arrived, and the lesson they had learned would remain in the minds of all who had witnessed it. The calm that once defined the Empire was gone. The certainty of their supremacy had been shattered. The humans had proven that power, intelligence, and presence could change the course of a civilization. The Zarnath Empire would recover, but it would never forget the lessons of that day. Humanity had entered their system, demonstrated their extraordinary abilities, and left a mark that would endure for generations. The galaxy would never see them the same way again.